back to the 1930s. Not such a great time, was it? We were ushered from the roaring 20s of flappers and music to the Great Depression. But what if I were to tell you that we will be taking a trip back in time with our own Great Depression? Just like that of the 1930s, I believe it's important to explain today why we will enter another Great Depression if things keep on going the way they are. And some examples as to how we will with things such as trade and unemployment. Then lastly, what solutions we can use to get out of it. So let's start with the Great Depression. The Great Depression began with the stock market crash of 1929 and was made worse by the 1930 Dust Bowl. But what about today? Now we are facing the coronavirus, which not only affects our health but also our lives. Businesses are closed down, international trade is drying up, and as a result of the pandemic, and we now could very well be on track of a collapse as severe as it was in the 1930s. So first, let's talk about how it will affect the international trade. According to TheGuardian.com in the article, Coronavirus Putting World on Track for New Depression, the WTO says that end to the trade tension between U.S. and China will help minimize the fallout of the pandemic. This article also talks about how the unavoidable decline in trade and output will have consequences for our household and businesses. But how can we worry about trade without first looking at our own economy? And the unemployment that will also bring us down. With millions of people losing their jobs and business investment and consumer spending decline, we are more than likely to find ourselves transported back to around 2011 or 2012 environment after the recession. According to Vox.com in the article, when will the economy be good again? The economy is no longer the biggest story in the world, but the unemployment rate will be highland wages and will still be depressed. It's helpful to remember how the economic recovery began last time around June of 2009. It will also talk about how the shock of the virus is going to be enough to push us off a normal recession. Then in another article by the New York Times, How to Prevent a Coronavirus Depression, also talks about the unemployment rate that could hit 30%, which is 3 times its level as the 2008-2009 recession. Not only that, but GDP could also fall at a 50% annual rate. In the next quarter, it would be 5 times worse than the single quarter on record. And lastly, if people had been able to move on with their lives without damage, it would still stump people's economic lives for years to come. And when it comes to unemployment, having 10 weeks of lockdown or more could do significant damage to the community, business, capital, stock. If we have, let's say, another 10 or more weeks of lockdown, businesses in the kind of place where low-skilled workers will be out of business. Now that I've explained why we will go into a depression, I propose some ideas of what we can do and go into it prepared. Think of a 3-legged canvas that you would see if you took art class. It supports the artwork with each of its 3 legs. Now think of the first leg as a leg that supports people who are unemployed. When people lose their job and remain unemployed or can't find another job, they are more likely to lose their home to something like foreclosure, or they may lose their health care coverage. Then you also have to think about when people's income collapse in a crisis. It can have long-term consequences. So what can we do? For example, in a New York Times article, it says that by sharing arrangements in which hours are cut by employees are not laid off, with unemployment benefits filling the income gap. Then later down the road, when everything does pick up, it will be easier for the firm to restart because it doesn't have to start all over hiring new people. Then we have the second leg on the canvas. This leg will make sure businesses don't collapse. Businesses such as restaurants are now being reduced to a handful of takeout and deliveries while we are self-isolating, and just like with our first leg, places like restaurants can cut back employee hours and not let them go, but the landlord of the restaurant would still have to pay bills. So what if the businesses get some mix of forbearance from its creditors and favorable loans? Then if that happens, it may be able to open again as soon as it can, and it's safe too, which will allow it to return to its normal role in the economy. Then you have the last leg of the canvas. This leg will allow financial system support and recovery. As it says in the New York Times article, it talks about the Fed have recently announced a range of programs, many built on Mr. Bernanke's informal Fed chair crisis response strategies from 2008. With that, we can try to prevent that financial problem from taking hold of us. To wrap up this video, I would like to say one more thing in the conclusion of this speech. At some point, we're going to have to see what we are causing through the lockdown, and at some point is now. We will have to worry about what we will be doing with our society, and what we have when all of this is over. And I believe that people who are saying that we won't go through a depression are wrong, whether it's a Great Depression like the 30s or a bump in the road. I believe it was important to explain today some of the reasons why we will enter a Great Depression, like when I talked about international trade and unemployment, and provide some solutions such as 3 supporting legs of a canvas, and how we will use it to get out of it. Now, what do you think will become of the next? What do you think we will become the next depression for the history book?